Good afternoon, people. It is Monday. Wonderful Monday, August 12th already. Summer is halfway over. Schools are back in session. There's a lot of excitement and buzz. I remember as a school leader, every single year, the day before school, like the first day of school when students returned, I was always nervous about students coming back to school. So I know you all are like humming around with excitement and welcoming your staff back, and that's really an exciting time. So while there's a lot of work to be done, the work is always going to be a lot. Take some time to enjoy and relish in the feeling that you have, like this excitement, right? You're alive and it's exciting to be, in a position where you're influencing other adults and students and having such a positive impact on their lives. So take a moment in the midst of all of the excitement and celebrate that. Okay. So, hi again. My name is Dr. Demia. Um, and thank you for joining in or either watching the replay. Today, I want to talk about. So, this session is really what I like to call what are your thoughts, right? Because there's some ideas that I share and I tie it into some data to kind of show you that there's data all around you. And as a school leader or a leader in general, right? Like you should be using data to help make your decisions, to inform your decisions. And so that's what this session is about. So I'm just going to jump right into it. You all know that my favorite phrase by Margaret Wheatley, be brave enough to start the conversation that matters. And I always add to be courageous enough to create the disruption that's needed for our most marginalized kids, right? So let's talk about the new school year. And we know that as school leaders, I know that I used to jot down things that I realized, oh, well, let me write this down for next year and keep this in mind as a note that I need to update this job description, or I need to be really more specific with, how I am explaining the responsibilities to a new staff member or even a staff member who's in a different role, right? Or even explaining rituals and procedures to families in the school community. And so as a school leader, we are constantly taking mental notes. And a lot of times we may jot it down on a piece of paper or on a post-it, right? Because you're constantly on the go. And then by the end of the school year, you have notes all over the place. You can't quite remember what you said because in the moment, what you thought about was really like it was great. And you knew that it would have a significant impact on the outcome, but your notes are everywhere. Like I know that was me. I had post-it notes on the wall, on the doorknobs, by the light switch, like just any and every place that you felt you would remember what changes needed to occur, right? It's very common for us to do that. As leaders, it's common for you to constantly be reflecting. And if not, that's a flag, right? Like you should, as a leader, period, especially in education, constantly be in reflection mode to see what can change, because the minute we feel like we've mastered it all is the minute we take two steps back, because learning is constant. And I like to tell my staff all the time, like, I may be the school leader, but you all are telling me what I need to do, right? I can't do this job. You can't do the job without the information from the people in your community. That requires reflection, right? And so I have a question for you before we get in. And as we go along, I want to share 3 steps that you can take to help prepare yourself for being really clear on the roles and expectations that you share with your staff upon their return, which should be happening soon, if not happened already. Okay. But I do have a question to get us started. So, have you ever experienced the frustration of like being in a role that was completely unclear, right, leading to missed opportunities and and poor decisions were made? I have. Just recently in my last role, the role before me being a coach and consultant, I was in a position where it was a newly created role. It wasn't very clear around what was expected. And you have to be able to be the type of person who kind of ebb and flow and go like It's okay not knowing. You have to be uncomfortable with not knowing. However, in education, that is not productive. You as a leader, you should always have parameters and at least some things that you can check off to say, these are the things that I need you to focus on. Now, will those things change? Absolutely, right? We deal with adults all day long, so things will change. But there definitely should be some things in place that you are sharing with your staff in terms of parameters, even if you don't know the finite details right now, because those things will can be added along the way during the school year. Okay, so imagine starting the school year without any clear roles. What does that look like? Imagine if your leadership team, you have two assistant principals, two coaches, right? You have your special educator, the chair. You may have an academic dean and a behavior dean. So anywhere about 6 to 8 people on your core leadership team, including you as the school leader. Imagine if even two of those people out of the 8 did not have clear roles. What would that look like? Paint a picture right now on what you think that would look like if there were no clear roles, right? You have a job description, and I'm not talking about that, right? Because very often we get confused with a job description and having clear roles and expectations for each member of your leadership team. And I'm only speaking about your leadership team now because you have to be represented as one band, one sound. That's another whole process that I'd like to talk through at another time, but you have to be represented as one. And so it's really important for your core instructional leadership team to understand the roles, okay? Because studies have shown that leadership teams with clear expectations are 25% more likely to achieve their goals, right? And report 30% higher team satisfaction when there is a clear understanding, right? So, hopefully, with the next 3 steps that I'm about to discuss with you, you can hopefully take one or two or maybe all three back to where your perspective places and begin to think about so that you can employ with your leadership team. Okay. Share your thoughts. What are you thinking? Have you experienced this type of uncertainty before in a previous role? And how did that make you feel? So share your thoughts in the comments. All right. So the first step, and this may sound like duh. I know that, right? But it really isn't, because you really need to take the time to figure out the nuanced details that you may not know because a situation has not occurred yet, right? So define roles and responsibilities. So why does that matter? So according to a report by McKinsey and Company, organizations with clearly defined roles and responsibilities experience 20% fewer conflicts, 15% faster decision-making processes. Think about that. Clear roles increase the efficiency of your decision-making process, right? And we know that in education, we don't have time to waste, right? We would talk about this sense of urgency, which sometimes I think can be counterproductive for us just as human beings with this constant rush, rush, rush. But when you put systems in place, you don't need to think about urgency in that way if you're efficient in your processes. So if there's clear roles and you're cutting down, like you're increasing your decision-making processes by 15%, that's huge. So clear roles can prevent overlap. And the biggest piece, which is hugely lacking in public education, as we all know, is accountability, right? It fosters accountability when you have clear roles and responsibilities. So here's a tip on how to work through those clear roles, right? For each role that you have in your building, create a detailed list of the roles and responsibilities, right? For each leadership team member. What is it that you want your 2 APs to do and focus on? Do you want one AP to focus on literacy and support the literacy instruction? and work hand in hand with one of the coaches, and the other one focusing on math and science. Like, you need to think through those things, but you also need to consider what are the strengths that your leadership team members bring to the table, right? I remember hiring a coach at a school, and she wanted to be hired for ELA. And we didn't have a role for ELA. I had a role for math. And I liked her and I wanted her in the building. And so I hired her for math, and she did the best that she could, but she would have done much better if she was hired in the role that she felt proficient in, right? Like the content she felt proficient in. So you have to consider those things. Needless to say, I moved her out of that math role and she became um a dean of behavior and my AP eventually. So and now she's a principal doing really well. But anyway, I digress. Make sure that the person, like, this is a strength that they have, that you are assigning them that role or responsibility. Okay. Um, so create a detailed list of the roles and responsibilities for each leadership team member and think about the specific tasks, right? What are the daily responsibilities and decision making authority you want to give that team member? So, for example, one of my assistant principals, her job was to contact any substitute teachers when a staff member called out. She was responsible for ensuring coverage in the building, right? That was her role. She understood that. We didn't have issues with substitute teachers because she knew that that was her role and one of her major responsibilities that the other leadership team members did not have to think about. Okay. Um, so let me give you some more data, because I'm gonna throw some data in here, right? Because data is everything. So a study from the Harvard Business Review found that teams with clearly defined roles had 35% more productivity, right? So you can apply this by ensuring that your assistant principal knows precisely where they fit in this process. And the impact, like I mentioned before, is that clear roles will lead to quicker decision making. The team members will understand like what their lanes are in their domain, and it reduces delays in any processes and reduces confusion, because the last thing you want is a leadership team that is confused. That will ruin the foundation of creating this what's the word I'm looking for, credibility as a leader, right? If your leadership team is confused, think about the impact that has as a leader and your credibility in a building. It totally destroys it. So making sure and taking the time to write these things down, right? Even if I use chart paper all the time. So I would have chart paper in my office and just write the things down as the year went along, who would be assigned for what, who was the stronger person to do what. And if I realized that the scale was getting teetered a little, or maybe one AP it felt like and looked like on paper like she had more responsibilities than the other, then I would look to see like what things can the other AP take, so that this one AP is not overwhelmed with a whole lot of responsibilities, right? So having something visual for me really helped. And I used chart paper, big chart paper. And as my leadership team would walk in the office and we would have meetings, they would see it there and we would have conversations, like AP would be like, okay, yeah, I actually would enjoy calling the substitute teacher. So yeah, let me have that, right? It's about this collective decision making process on the roles and responsibilities, because naturally in a leadership role you can always tell people what to do, right? But then it's just compliance. And if you're trying to build culture, you want to include your leadership team in the like deciding what roles and responsibilities they will have, right? Because now they're bought into it. Now they understand it better, right? Because you're having these conversations. So that's one way, right? List everything down, chart it down, each team member and their roles and responsibilities, so that you have a visual. Okay? Share your thoughts. If you're watching the replay, if you're watching, what are you thinking about this? How can you use this in a way, not even in your leadership, but even in other capacities? Okay? The second step, communicate, communicate, communicate. I can't stress this enough. And this was a huge learning curve for me as a school leader because I assumed that because the people I worked with in leadership, I assumed that they automatically understood what I meant when I made simple comments, right? Over communication, I have learned, is essential to reduce confusion. It is absolutely essential. So, why does it matter? Research from the Center of Creative Leadership shows that 50% of leadership teams cite unclear communication as a major barrier to effectiveness. It makes sense. If I don't understand what you mean and I haven't asked you for clarity, right? Then I'm confused. And again, confusion will ruin your credibility as a leader if your leadership team is confused, right? So clear communication from the outset ensures everyone is on the same page. One band, one sound. Okay? So a tip that you can use for this is make sure one thing that we did every single week, we had our Friday morning before school open leadership team meetings. The entire team came together and we did this to make sure that we were on the same page, right? That we understood what the expectation was for next week because of what happened during this week. If there were any questions, right? I have to say that after 3 years, it took me 3 years to build the leadership team that I wanted at my first school. And once that team was together as a unit, we rolled. And honey, when I tell you we rolled, we rolled. We were so good in terms of communicating with one another. If something wasn't clear, and like I said, I was constantly working on, and still to this day, working on communicating clearly, right? Making sure that people understand by over communicating. And I think part of it too is that I didn't want to make people feel like they didn't know what they were doing. So I just didn't communicate deeply, right? But my leadership team members would say to me, Miss Thomas, at the time I was Miss Thomas, not Dr. Thomas. Miss Thomas, could you tell me what you mean by that? Can you elaborate? Right. So having leadership team members who are asking for clarity is really, really critical as well, right? Because again, you want to avoid the confusion. And the way to avoid the confusion is to communicate clearly and communicate it early. Don't wait to communicate the roles and expectations to your leadership team when everybody else is back in the building. If your students are returning next week, you should be having those conversations with your leadership team right now, being very clear about what they're like, the list that you write down in step one, right? The impact that this can have is it's clear, right? On decision making. With clear expectations communicated, decisions are made with confidence, right? That minimizes any misunderstandings and any do-overs because something wasn't clear the first time. Again, efficiency is key. We're talking about urgency with kids. That means we have to have systems and communication and consistency that will eventually lead to this efficient process, right? So let's share your thoughts now. So the first step was, list your leadership team members and the roles and responsibilities that they have right now. I'm sure you have a list of things that you also want done or to initiate or start to do in the building. And what do those things look like? And as you have initiatives that are being introduced in your building, you have to write that down too. Put it on the chart paper. Who's going to be responsible? Who's taking the lead on this? Who's the second person to follow up with this, right? There should be a lead for everything and a follow-up person for any huge initiatives that are going on. Who's the lead for talking to parents? Who's the follow-up for that, right? Who's the lead for any special education issues? Who's the follow-up for that? So think those things through, okay? The third and final step, okay? Establish these regular check-ins. And I think I jumped the gun a little bit with this because I got excited just trying to share that our team was jamming so well that we were meeting on Fridays. But make sure that you are checking in. Like, you have to check in with your leadership team consistently. Here's one of the things that I would suggest doing, right? Because there was a study done by Dillette that found that teams with regular check-ins reported higher performance levels and 23% more engagement. Okay. Regular check-ins keep everyone aligned and accountable. So let me share something that I used to do with my leadership team and my staff, actually. Um, at the beginning of the year, there's the initial conference that is mandatory for every staff person. And well, it was when I was a principal. I don't know, a lot of things have changed, but you still need to have this conference with your staff. And so I would have one-on-one conferences myself. I never passed those off to my assistant principals because that was an opportunity to connect with my staff one-on-one, to learn about any goals that they had for the upcoming year. They were responsible for having at least looked at their class roster and have an idea of the composition of students in their room in terms of data, right? So when you start the year off with expectations, they will meet you. Your staff will meet you as you are supporting them in this, right? So the initial conferences were always around what are some of the goals that you have? How can I support you in those goals? What are some things that you would like for me to do to support you in those goals, right? Um, what does your class composition look like? Tell me with some ideas that you've had. Have you, because I know you've seen it already. What are some things that you're thinking about in terms of instruction and supporting your students? For my leadership team, it was, what are your goals again? How can I support you? What are some things one thing that you would really like to grow in that we can actually begin to, continue to have the conversation throughout the school year, right? And what learning opportunities would you like to help move you along this leadership journey, right? So it's like this trajectory of learning that needs to occur. And so very often, those initial conferences typically are like a checkbox. It's done. Give it to your supervisor. I've met with every staff person. That's it. No, 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 no. This is where step 3 is really important, where you're establishing regular check-ins and accountability. For my staff, I would, during informal observation feedback time, I would lift up one of the goals, right? And this requires preparation. It's not just happenstance. You're meeting with a specific teacher or 2 teachers today. You go back to their initial conversation and pull the data, the actual conversation data, and bring that back into the conversation. That's what you do with your leadership team too. That initial conference is a way to collect data and a way to really document how you can support, or not document, but how you can support your leadership team and staff in their growth, right? So if I'm capturing the goals for my leadership team, and during my regular check-ins, because we would meet once a week as a team, but then I would also meet once a month with each of my leadership team members and talk about how do they feel they are doing in terms of meeting the goals that we talked about during the initial conference, right? The mid-year conference, it's the same thing. Establishing regular check-ins and going back to the initial conversation lets them know that, one, as a leader, you inherently care about their growth and well-being, right? Professionally, you want to see them do well, because we all know when our adults do well, our kids do well. And that's the goal, right? I had to learn that too. um, so set up, your monthly check-ins with your leadership team. Create the time. Let me tell you, the time that you put in to do that now will be so beneficial for you in the long run, right? So when you're creating these monthly check-ins to review their responsibilities, right? Assess, their team, their performance against the goals that they set for themselves and the expectations, right? It's no surprise during mid-year what that conversation is going to look like. It won't be a surprise toward the end of the school year for the when their evaluation is great or not so great, right? So provide feedback and make adjustments as needed. So, another piece of data here, because I'm going to always use some data to support what's going on. So, according to the Society for Human Resource Management, leaders who regularly visit role expectations can improve team morale by 22%, right? Using check ins to ensure your team stays on track and adapt to new challenges as they arise helps them feel supported. And that's all adults want in education. And honey, we can't afford to lose any more people in education unless they're absolutely destroying kids. I believe every adult and standing in front of kids really wants to be there. And your job, our job as leaders, is to reignite that passion and support them again so that they feel like they actually can do it. Right? So the impact that this can have when you're establishing regular check-ins and these accountability measures on decision making, this impact on decision making is that these regular check-ins create feedback loops that keep your decisions aligned because you're constantly, evolving goals, their goals to the school goal, right? And then it ensures that you as a leader are responsive, and not only that, proactive, right? Because a lot of times in education, we are just reacting to things instead of proactively addressing things. So let me know your thoughts, what you're thinking about this, the 3 steps. So the first one was to list your leadership team members and the roles and responsibilities, right? Keep that list present in the room, somewhere on a big chart paper or something like that. And as new things are coming up, you add responsibilities to each person accordingly, right? You have conversations with them when they see it, like, okay, what do you think about this? That's one. Two, you make sure that you're communicating clearly and early. Do it before the rest of the staff come back so are you all are one band, one sound all the time, right? And then 3, establish these regular check-ins with them, right? A great way to do this is when you are having establish it as a team, right? You should have weekly core leadership team meetings, and you should have your monthly one-on-ones with each leadership team member every single month. And what the foundation of that is your initial conference. There is time. I don't want to hear there's no time. There's time. You make the time, right? When you start off strong, it'll stay that way. And when you start off in this way, you'll find that you're creating more time on the back end because your efficiency will increase. Okay. So the data doesn't lie, right? Like I shared some data points with you. It does not lie, right? Clear expectations are vital for a leadership team to be successful, right? By defining these clear roles, communicating them early, and establishing regular check ins, you will set your team up for a productive and harmonious school year. One band, one sound, right? So here's what I need you to do. I need you to schedule a meeting with your leadership team, right? To specifically talk about roles and expectations, right? And set the stage for this decisive this decisive leadership that you all will embark on for this school year. Okay. So once you do that, hit me up in the comments. Let me know how it goes. I'm truly excited for you all. I love the beginning of the school year. It is such a exciting time. So much adrenaline and things going on, and people getting rooms together and final decisions being made. So enjoy the moment, right? Smile, enjoy it, be proactive in your thinking, communicate clearly. And if you need some support, contact me. You can hit me in my DMs or just send me a message. I'd love to communicate with you and find out how I can better support you. Maybe we can set up a 15-minute coffee chat. That would be great. So thank you for joining the session today. Or if you're watching the replay, thank you very much. And remember to follow me for more content on leadership and establishing an empathetic leadership strategy, how to use your emotional intelligence, how to strengthen your decision making. And feel free to share your thoughts on anything that you've heard in the comments below. And keep going, because remember, we need you. Our babies need you. Do not give up on them. Okay. And I'll see you next Monday. Hopefully, you'll be your first day of school. I'd love to hear about it. So let me know how it goes. Have a great evening.